Today's guest is Orphan Prodigy with Ian Keller. Now, I had a chance to meet Ian through a mutual friend, Danny Felt. So this is a series of episodes now that I've been able to do because of Danny. So shout out there. And Ian and I go on to discuss how Orphan Prodigy, his most recent project for music, was born. We discuss his journey overcoming agoraphobia after a long career of music touring and how that led to his agoraphobia, how he overcame it. And we make sure to highlight things that are important for musicians who want to be in the business of music that they need to understand because it's not just a craft, it's also a business. And for Ian, it's actually mutually exclusive. He sees it as an extension of what he's doing. So I think this is really a conversation that a lot of people who want to be in the business of music are going to be able to appreciate in terms of the insights that Ian was willing to leave behind as he left it all in the field, as we discussed here at the end of the episode there. And with that said, we go beyond things to being able to take advantage of resources and tools that are available to creatives out there in this modern day and age. And most importantly, we discuss medication for a modern world and the inspiration behind a project that was dear to him because of how much creative control he was able to have over the sound and what he was doing with that project as opposed to what it's like working with a band. So without further ado, Orphan Prodigy. Man, I am very grateful to Danny for sending people my way. There was a time where it was really hard for me to get people to show up in my radar to be able to do this. So I feel very lucky and I don't take anyone for granted. So I really appreciate you stopping by. Uh, you know, it's not every day you get to talk to somebody who has put out their own music, like fully produced everything themselves. It's one thing. Sometimes people will buy beats online. Sometimes people will do the songwriting, but not the singing. And it's piecemeal, right? Even myself, I don't do it all, but you're all self-contained and still evolving in the process. I took a listen to your music. And personally, I was a big fan of Trader and Trance Realization. There was something
Oh,
about
thank you.
those tracks in particular that really spoke to me into sort of the things that I like and love to listen to. But I'm a big fan of Medication for a Modern World. Just the idea of it, it's very. I can see the artistic vision you had behind it, and I think one of the places I'd love to start with, because in the notes that you had shared with me, I read that you sort of began to drift in this direction in 2019. But is that where your musical journey really starts, or did you do something else entirely prior to that?
So prior to that, I was doing, I've been in the industry for, this is my 25th year, I think. I've been doing this a long time. Prior to 2019, I was in a rock band called Metarana. And yeah, we toured, we did almost three albums, five EPs. We did international, national touring. And I kind of there was in 2019 it was clear that we were doing the South by Southwest festival, and it was clear at that point where my drummer and my bass player, especially my drummer, didn't want to do any more touring. And coincidentally, I kind of hit this roadblock of my own where I became agoraphobic, I think, from all the touring and kind of like the bad influences of, just kind of the cliches of being on the road. And so I really had to kind of stop everything, put it on pause, and kind of redirect my focus to something else. And it took me I won't lie, I went into a massive undertaking therapeutically. I went through this exposure therapy. It was literally like where I was switching off between these two therapists, and they would take me to places like the mall or just big crowded spaces where, I would basically get triggered. And after, 6 months of that, I decided I was okay enough to re enter the world, so to speak. And I kind of decided that I wanted to be in music still, but also kind of be behind the scenes. And so that led me to engineering. I found this great place called the Conservatory of Recording Arts and Sciences in Arizona and moved there. Um, Moved myself in, got settled. it wasn't long before I got introduced to Pro Tools and Logic Pro, which are, two digital audio workstations. So as a musician, when you go into the studio, you have an engineer and they're doing all that stuff. And but for me as an artist, and to kind of get that perspective finally, and see how everything worked, and it was a huge learning experience. And not only that, it wasn't maybe 2 weeks before I was into Logic that I was starting to write again. And I finished everything. I graduated and everything, but Orphan Prodigy was born out of the third week that I spent in Arizona, I think, or something like that.
I want to skip ahead here since it came up and just dive into this idea of what was it like for you when you approached a project initially prior to expanding your arsenal into engineering itself with music, and then after the fact, how do you approach projects differently, if so?
Um, you mean like from a songwriting standpoint, or
Yeah, as you're kicking something off, back in the day, was it you just grabbed a guitar or whatever instrument you were feeling and
you
kind
know, I, I've always written the same way. And I've always written backwards. So like it's always been on a really janky laptop, which of course is in the room right now, from 2007. So my old college laptop. And but I always write in MIDI. So, MIDI software, which is, for those that don't know, is kind of like a form of soft coding for a musician. Just numbers, ones and zeros and things like that. But yeah, so I always start with drums and I layer everything: drums, synth. I don't really get to the melody until the very end, and I don't get to any lyrics until I start demoing. Um, and I don't edit my lyrics once I've recorded that first take, unless there's something like horribly wrong that doesn't fit. But I find that that's the best way to preserve the emotions and the feelings that are kind of coming out. Because every time you it's not like an overdub where, like, you're just trying to make something stronger. It's more like that first initial performance. Like, what does the music evoke in me? And what's it making me feel? What colors am I feeling? What am I seeing? I also have what's called synesthesia, which is seeing, tasting, feeling colors in a way. It's hard to describe even to this day, but um, so that initial, like I said, that initial take really captures what I'm feeling, and so the music is what drives the lyrics for me. It's not the other way around.
got it. So even before audio engineering, you were already dabbling in MIDI itself as a whole.
Yes, that's always how I've done it. Anytime I wrote a song, even in a band setting, I was always
That's cool.
composing the MIDI, layering over some, scratch take vocally, and giving it to them. They'd learn it, we'd rehearse it, and we were off to the races, so to speak.
Now, I know you mentioned once you broadened your horizons and stepped into engineering that the songwriting started coming back after the period of your life where agoraphobia took over and things of that nature. So that's one understanding of how it is you get the juices flowing. Prior to that, or even after that, was it just the act of having a musical bed of drums and a mood that would get you going, or is there some creative habit or tool you swear by, even then or more recently, that just gets you to a place where you're ready to write a song, or you're in a spot where inspiration can strike and you can capture that lightning in a bottle?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. I hate to come off. I hate to sound, like this, but the thing with like writer's block, like I will never truly understand that. For me, the most exciting thing, and I've said this a million times before, but just staring at that blank screen of MIDI sheet music, that's the most exciting thing for me. Really, it's just seeing the possibilities. I compare it to like building Lego as a kid, which I still do. Um, it's just like, how far can I take this? I'm making the rules, I'm making this universe, creating this soundscape, this environment, essentially. How far can I take that before it breaks? It's just a form of control, I think, in the end, for somebody who's adopted.
No,
you know.
I totally resonate with that. I understand what you mean about the confusion behind writer's block or creative blocks. Sure, you might run across something that maybe doesn't inspire you, but you can always make something, right? That's
Yeah,
you can
yeah,
always make something. Making something is just taking something and something else and putting it together, and now you've made something. No, I 100% get where you're coming from, and I respect that you bring it up because it can be controversial to try to toe that line and say, I never have writer's block. And people go, oh, really? And it turns into a whole thing. But I agree with you. It's one of
yeah.
those things where you can always create. So in the name of that, the I love the cover art for Medication for a Modern World. Was that also something that you dabbled in? Was the design of that, not just the music, but the overall entire imagery behind the project?
So I initially wanted to use my favorite art. I don't really, for some reason, art doesn't really resonate with me. But the only form of art that truly resonates with me is surrealist art, surrealism. And there's this one called "The Art of Living" by Renee Marguerite, and I originally wanted to get the rights to use that as the album artwork. I haven't said that publicly yet. So that's the first time. But I couldn't get in touch with the estate. I tried emailing for like 2 years, and it never came through. So I was on Instagram maybe a year ago, maybe less than that, and I stumbled across this guy's account who was doing this amazing surrealist art, and surrealisty. He goes by that on Instagram as his handle, and everything he posts, I'm like, whoa! It's just like it's almost like, for me, it's like looking at a video game art, stuff. I'm a huge gamer, so maybe that's why surrealist art resonates with me.
Yeah.
So I found him, and I was like, dude, we have to work together, please. Like, I'll do anything. And he's like, yeah, sure. Don't have to be so excited. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
He
He
has
was
no,
great
yeah,
though.
no, I get it. I get it. He has, you never have an idea of like the kind of impact you might have on someone because
Right,
this is just
right.
what you do, right? To him, it's just, yeah, this is what I do.
So
Even,
yeah, I just no, I said to him, like, let's. I had kind of a concept. I wanted to show two kind of paradoxical elements here. So obviously, you see the ground above the woman, above the woman's face, and then also below, you see beneath, and it's kind of, but she's kind of the bridge between the two.
yeah.
And so it kind of shows what's going on in the world, what's going on in her head, what's going on inside her. Her expression is kind of like,
Oh, it's beautiful, man.
it's
I
beautiful, but
first thing that stood out to me was the cover art. I was like, whoa. I was like, okay. And
yeah,
then you hear the sound bed and what you're trying to accomplish with your project. I really I had an understanding of the consistency across the project. You can tell you meticulously thought through what you were trying to do for this, and so I appreciate that as just somebody who understands what it takes to create something. You
thank
know,
you.
and I want to move things forward if I can here. You mentioned you've been in the business for over 25 years, right? And still going. So, what's something that you made a mistake on early on that you now know better, but wish you had known back then?
Oh God, so many. Where to start? um, Definitely over rehearsing. Um, Back in the early days, we were like, one of the tightest. I had one of the tightest bands in Queens, at least in my area. But we spent too much time doing that, and not enough time promoting. And this was also this, in the early 2010s. Music was really shifting from alternative to EDM, and so we kind of got lost in that shuffle. We kind of missed the train um, in that way. So we always kind of stayed pretty under the surface, underground. Um, but yeah, I think for me, what's been so liberating about Orphan Prodigy, and not making mistakes, is that I'm not making the same compromises I did when I was in a band setting. When you're on an indie label, you have a producer, you have a manager, you have two other bandmates, or whatever, and everybody has an opinion. Everybody kind of dilutes your idea to a point where you don't recognize it anymore. And that was a big problem for me. the only saving grace I think was performing live, because everything is more fluid that way, and you kind of forget that you have this whole concept and idea in your head about what what things should be like. And with Medication for a Modern World and Orphan Prodigy, I really was able to take the time to craft, like as you mentioned, meticulously, and not surrender any of my creativity to anyone. Um, is this is I say this all the time, but this is like the most unfiltered um, music and art I've ever done, and I'm so proud of it. I'm so happy that I get to release it, and I get to make a living out of this. And I couldn't be more grateful to not make those same mistakes.
You said something I think that a lot of people sort of glaze past or say in passing, but don't really drive home how important this is for those who are less experienced. And because you have the experience, I'd love to go deeper on that. You said, we focus on rehearsals and all these things that are great when it comes to craft, but that's not the same as the business of music. And you said marketing and promoting the material is a whole other battle that is often looked over for someone who just sees himself as a creative or a
Right.
musician. What was that turning point for you, and what really drove it home, and what do you make sure you do now to capitalize on all the invested energy and effort you've put in?
I think the main difference, the starting point is, I think, the difference, and I think that's because so let me, I'll start from my own story with Orphan Prodigy. I mean, when I finished this record, um, I immediately said, okay, well, the next step is A, the next step is B. It just kind of, when you're passionate about something and you're not stagnant, you're not pushed into corners by egos and other things and other people's opinions and what you should or shouldn't do. You're forced to sort of figure it out. And I'll tell you, like one of the best parts about living in New York City was, I met Danny 11 years ago, and she didn't recognize me my PR person who, we reconnected full circle, like, I don't know, what is that, 2010 to 2025, 20, you know, I mean, it's crazy how things work that way. But you kind of realize that when you are passionate about something, especially something that you've worked so hard on for, I worked on this album for a year and a half. You kind of just realize what needs to be done, and especially with social media, when Instagram first came out, I was like, back in, like, when I first became aware of it, I was like, this is so, I thought Facebook was bad, and then it was just like just pictures, just pictures, really, just pictures. And now Instagram is my best platform. It's my biggest platform. It's where I get all my audience retention. It's where I can get ad revenue. It's just turned into my hub. Really, it's better than my .com in that way. And in that, it's crazy. We can just kind of run our businesses on our phones now. And so for an indie artist, I mean, like me, that's the biggest thing, I think, is just being able to understand the functions of what needs to happen. And when you spend enough time on your phone and on Instagram and looking at reels and all these things, you realize what's working for other people, what's not working for other people, and you kind of adjust to it. You can adapt to the environment, and it becomes fun because it's something that you haven't really tried before. And so it's just all part of the adventure. It's part of the train that never stops rolling. I mean, this is like the eighth interview I've done today, so it's like, you know what I mean? It just keeps going, and it's
Awesome.
fun.
So if I were to understand that correctly, you see you see marketing and promotion of a record as an extension of the record and not the it's a totally separate task, which is how some people, especially people who are quote unquote only the creative or only the musician, where they're like, oh, I'm not really a marketer, I'm not really a business person. You seem to include that as part of the whole expanse and the adventure itself, to take a word from you.
Yeah, I think the biggest misconception is that, if you're still thinking that in 2025 you're gonna, somebody's gonna come find you at some club and you're at, during your best vocal performance, like, or your best guitar solo, like, those days are so far gone. They were gone when I thought they were relevant in 2010. I mean, there's no rock bands getting budgets for, it's just not that way. I mean, yes, there's always that one in a million, but I mean, I look at the bands out today, and I there are so many great underground bands and artists in general.
Actually, I'm curious for your take on this. As you were saying a few things, it came up. How do you view like building a community of or building audience and listeners and engaged people who love the work that you do? How do you view that? Because for some people, again, coming back to this quote unquote creative, and you did touch on the idea of or the fallacy to believe that you're going to get discovered. The other side of that coin is believing that just anybody who loves your music is just going to naturally support it, which is the other fallacy, thinking that you don't have to promote. Like you shared it once
100%.
on Instagram and oh, nobody cares, nobody likes my music, especially not my friends and family. Why is that? What's your take on that? Because that happens a lot to people.
Yeah, 120%. I mean, I think, yeah, the other big misconception is that, like you said, you're gonna throw something up. It's the greatest song in the world, but I could have thrown Trader into the ether, and nobody, you know, you have to have a talented person like Danny behind that, or you have to have people that know how to do that, know how to push things, right? It's again, it's just you have to develop that community. And what I've done, which is crazy, I mean, Orphan Prodigy wouldn't, in a lot of ways, have happened if it weren't for the pandemic and that whole lifestyle. After I'd written most of those songs, or a lot of maybe half the record, I was performing to the backing tracks that I'd written on live streams, on Zoom, on Instagram Live, Facebook Live, all that stuff. And slowly, I would integrate talking about my adoption and talk and gameplay. I'm a big gamer, as I mentioned. And so all of those, those three parts: the music, the gaming, talking about adoption in real life, and lifestyle stuff, all those kind of converge, and that's what makes the Orphan Prodigy community. And I think the biggest takeaway from that is that, do not think for 1 second that in 2025 you're just a musician. You are a music creator. And music, you know
Forward slash. Yeah, 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 yeah. A
forward
hyphenate.
slash, music, in parentheses, content creator. So you're a music creator. um
No, I love that you say that because it needs to be heard by people who are only doing music and thinking and wondering why it's not getting them anywhere. What's your view on actually going out to events? Because it's one thing to have, and I want to come back to this because there's something I want to ask you about the streaming with the gaming and music. But the other side of the coin is actually going out to events. Now, you're someone who had gone on tour for a long time and you've been a part of all that. Do you still go to the scene, as they say?
um I haven't been to the scene, as they say, in many, maybe at least 4 years, 3 4 years.
Is it relevant anymore?
I think it'll always be relevant. I think that like, especially in the metal community, I know it's huge. It's very, you talk about a metal show, you could, I always hear about metal shows. I don't hear about alt rock shows and that kind
Right.
of thing. Which is, like, my world is alt rock and, whatever. But metal's huge. It's niche. But again, when we talk about community, it's, that is what metal fans want, is that's their way of
That's part of
having a
metal.
community. That's
Right,
part of that.
right.
That's part of the metal ethos or whatever.
Like punk used to be at some point.
Exactly, like punk used to be. Exactly. For my audience and my community, it's more reserved. It's a little, kind of like, we're a little. It's kind of, it's weird. It's kind of weird that it's like kind of a reflection of who I am. It's kind of like looking in the mirror sometimes. Like, there are people that are kind of hiding in the background at the back of the room, and they don't, the asshole on stage, sorry, the
You're
guy on
good.
stage is like, you know, everybody come up and, come to the front of the room. It's like, no, we're not going to do that. um we don't have
Yeah.
the confidence for that. So people, I've noticed with my community, it takes them maybe, I see some names kind of floating across the chat, like it takes them maybe 5 or 6 streams to kind of even say something sometimes. And I'm always encouraging, don't be shy. I'm like the shyest guy in the world. Like if I can do it, you guys can. I
Right.
would
I mean,
never.
you overcame a whole plethora of a whole other layer of shyness to the point where, you didn't want to go out anywhere with people. So it's really cool to hear you say that. Even in the middle of all that, you discovered community and through gaming and all these extensions, bringing it back to where I wanted to ask you is I have seen artists like, let's say, Logic, who's in the hip hop game, switch over to Twitch, right? There are Twitch streamers that'll invite musicians who are all famous on TikTok or growing on TikTok, and there's this whole amalgamation. And so one would think and conclude that that's something you should be doing. And you said yourself, you kept your ear to the streets, as they signed Eminem, as they say, by looking at what people are doing, what's working for them. Why is this happening? And it just so happened that you happen to love gaming, and so you can authentically, not just to get fans, but authentically stream and start gaming and talking about those things. Now, was it a natural extension for you to just go, well, I'm just going to throw on the camera and invite people to hang out with me?
No, I don't think it was natural at all. I mean, I watch. The other day I was watching like one of the first streams I ever did, and it's so awkward, and like the camera is terrible, and like there's no SM7B microphone
Right.
there, and there's no key light. Like there's nothing going on. The capture card is terrible. It's running at 30 frames, not 60. Like there's just all these like these sore thumb areas. And I just think, wow, I really, we really made the right investments. We really kind of made the right calls in terms of what gear to get and how to make it, essentially like any instrument. These are just tools to convey a message, right? And so I was just trying to convey the best possible version of my shy ass self, right? So we got the key lights, we got the capture cards, we got the interfaces, we got the hardware that could handle the streaming. So it just takes time, takes effort, and it takes a little bit of research, but essentially just extending yourself, really.
What do you think it is? Now we can get into now that we've shared enough pieces and put the Legos on the table here, what do you think it is about yourself that has pushed you to be able to be so open and adaptable to things, to explore different avenues and tools and resources, and in an effort to try to help those who don't believe, I don't do tech or whatever the case may be, where they're so hesitant and reluctant to open it up because that's just not what they do. And they literally personify or anthropomorphize the idea of like, that's not me, which is one way to quit an addiction. But when it comes to creating opportunities and taking advantage of things, is it just in your nature to be so curious about things and to explore them and not be afraid of the trial and error and the inevitable failures? Or is there something else that drove you to do those things?
You talk about, you mentioned trial and error, and I think for me, I think there's different dimensions to that. For me, I think the trial and error is part of not only just the game of life, but also the game of being an artist. That's the most exciting part for me, because it's, that's essentially songwriting in it, in a nutshell, is trial and error, what works, what doesn't, and how to make things fit. And but on the other side of that, I think there's also as an artist, as an actor, as a singer, as a dancer, as a musician, you're always facing rejection. And for me, rejection hits tenfold because of my being adopted, um, which is also, I think, why I entered that agoraphobic phase partially anyway. But anyway, I think, again, it's about just like, you can't hit any lower than where I've hit for me personally, I couldn't hit any lower than I did when I couldn't leave my apartment for 6 months. You know what I mean? So it's just kind of like I wouldn't say I'm fearless because, going across like going across a zip line for my wife's birthday at a mall, like, and feeling the cable slip, like, yeah, I care about living, like, I'm like, you guys got to fix this, you guys got to fix this thing, because I don't know how safe it is. But I don't, I kind of lost the plot there, but
Right, right. You're
it's
not gonna say you're fearless, but you're also not afraid to take some risk because you know risk is a necessary
I
part of
just
life.
think I just think, I faced enough rejection in my life to the point where I'm just like,
What's the
I'm
worst
too
that could
old.
happen? Right,
What's the
right.
worst that can happen? I'm too old. I'm too tired. Either take me or leave me. I'm really content with my life as it is now. I'm just like every other person. I have my good days and bad days, and horrible days even,
Yeah.
or and great days on the other side of that. So, it's all just, bringing it back to being human, and understanding that life isn't perfect and trial and error is just part of the process.
Looking at where things are now, would you say you're more inspired or inclined to double down on streaming and getting involved in the digital aspects of things, or tapering it back as there's this whole movement of touching grass and whatever the younger generations are talking about?
I think that's the trend. Personally, I think it's just maybe, I'm not part of that generation. I don't know. Maybe it's more, you know more than that. But for me and my community, my job as a musician and a creator, I am more into it than I've ever been. I'm just thinking about what's the next piece of hardware that I can get that can really upgrade the setup, that can upgrade the room, upgrade the feed, just like everything. I'm a huge tech guy, so, like, you say 4K OLED, I'm in the room.
Right. Right, right, right.
So, but yeah, for me, it's imperative, and I think in 2025, as an artist, you can touch grass all you want, but again, not the other 98% of the world is online watching stuff, hearing stuff, and engaging in communities, and that's where. So whether it's touching grass or it's online, at the end of the day, it's about where your community is, right? So
When did that start for you? The because you happen to be a career musician, right? So maybe that's why you're bold enough to say it. But there are some people who aren't willing to say, it's my job as a musician, XYZ, right? That statement in itself may seem like a throwaway statement, but for a lot of people, they say, "Oh yeah, I make music," but they don't say that's their job. Even if you're on your way to it, until you treat it as such, that's going to be a roadblock forever. And obviously, my personal opinion, but it, it it goes to show how important something so casual could be. And the whole effort of this show, apart from being able to share what you're working on, is also to help people see what they're maybe not seeing, make sense of things. And you said it, and it may seem kind of trivial, but I think it's important because there are some people who have imposter syndrome and aren't willing to stake a claim. It's my job as a dancer, as an actor, as an artist, as a painter, as a digital, graphic designer, whatever, XYZ. He said, it's my job as a musician to leverage these modern technologies and move forward in life. When did that start for you to be able to see this is my job?
I mean, I think I knew my purpose very early on. I was 10 years old when I went to Germany. One of my fathers has a German background, and so, he took me to Germany to visit my cousins who didn't speak any English. But she one of my cousins, she showed me the Offspring single, "Why Don't You Get a Job?" And I was like, I heard that, and I was shook, and it just, in that moment, I knew. When I heard that first curse word, I was like, "This is what I want to do for the rest of my life." I was 10 years old, and I knew that I was going to be a musician, and I've never looked back since that moment. So
I, you know, it's also, I want to make sure, you know, it's totally cool to curse on the show. I appreciate you
Yeah. Okay.
being careful. There's no
Yeah.
need for that. I mean, you can't have a show of musicians or, you know, people who are creative and not allow curse words. Some of the most creative
Yeah.
people, all they do is curse.
Right. 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 Which
So
is ironic because that's not a lot of cursing on my record except for in Trader, I think. But but yeah, no, I'm you know, I think you know, cursing is just for me, it's just another version of punctuation. You know, it's
I
not
absolutely agree. It's
right.
punctuation if there ever was one.
Exactly.
It's audio punctuation, if you will, right?
Yeah, verbal punctuation, man.
Hey, maybe that's the name of the next project.
Yeah, right, right, right here. You heard it
Hey,
first.
where do we get the
Drop
switchers and
it.
the sound effects?
Right. See, I
Uh,
don't have a stream deck. I don't have a stream deck. I don't have a stream deck, man.
no, no. So I want to turn things over for you to help you talk about what it is you got going on and invite people onto what you're doing. So where do you want people to connect with you? What's something you're working on now? And where can they hear your music?
Yeah, so orphanprodigy.com. That's where you can kind of find the central hub of things, you know, from merch to bio to videos to links to the socials, all that stuff. Instagram, like I said, is kind of my favorite platform. I run it myself, and you know, not to say we don't. We have a very small team that kind of runs things, and but including myself. But I'm always on Instagram and just you know, that's kind of where I live now. And again, it's just so ironic because you know, 10 years ago I was like, what the hell is what the fuck is Instagram? I just like I can't stand Instagram, and now here I am loving it, and it's my main platform. So
Yeah, you know, the platform has evolved as well, in all fairness, right? It
yeah,
started off
yeah,
as only pictures, but it is a lot of things now, and only pictures is not one of them. So
right.
yeah, reiterating, you can go to Orphan Prodigy, one word, all lowercase for Instagram, or you said orphanprodigy.com, was that?
Yeah, orphanprodigy.com.
Orphanprodigy.com makes it very easy. I mean, you're doing all the things.
Yeah, man.
You're paying for a domain, a
Paying for a
.com. You
domain.
know,
Yes.
most people won't even make that investment in themselves, you know? How,
Yeah,
this is a bonus question. How do you determine what's worth making an investment on? Because there's a lot of costs, right? Gear, .coms. Does this come right back to the whole idea of like it's just my job and that's part of business?
absolutely. I think it's what's necessary. I mean, I have a Marshall stack sitting downstairs in my on my soundstage where we do the virtual shows, but I don't use that thing anymore. I'm not 21. I don't need a Marshall stack. I literally just use an Axe Effects where I've programmed in all my tones and stuff. And when we do shows, I do not use an amp anymore. It's like, why do you need an amp when you can pump a really crispy sound through a PA system? And you know, people can listen.
Some
I'm
purists
not.
will argue, right, right, right.
Yeah, listen. A purist would dig me under the floor saying, well, if you use an SM57 and at like a 45-degree angle with like a combo of like an SM58, oh my God, it would be like amazing. And you don't know what you're missing. And power amp this and power amp that. Like, I'm not that guy. Like, I can tell you I can tell you how to make a great vocal chain, but I am a rhythm guitar player. I am not a lead guitar player. You don't want to hear me solo. So you know, the
Right
most
on.
soloing I do is in Trader actually. So,
Hey,
and that's just
uh,
melody.
yeah, no, again, to reiterate, so for the listeners, some of my favorite tracks were definitely Trader and Trance Realization. I don't know what it is about it, but I listened to the whole project before I jumped on with you, and I got a sense for it. And honestly, it's just it's an experience. I think there's a sound that you were forging with this, and I can respect that you come from a world like you said yourself. You had missed the transition when you were with your band for losing the forest for the trees and where priorities were as a group. And now that you've gone solo, you've been able to have more creative control, and it's evident how unified the experience was. Your fingerprint was all over the project. It was clear this was someone was involved in every aspect of it, and that was something that really stood out to me as someone who likes to make music as well, you know. So for me to have that experience, because I feel like musicians don't listen to music the same way regular people do.
No,
You
not
know,
at all.
there's a different ear a different perspective that you're listening from. Do you
A
find that to
critical
be
ear.
true?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Critical listening is, like literally just how musicians, I think, listen to music is just, you're picking, you can dissect certain parts for what they are. You're like, oh my God, that drummer is actually really solid. He's playing, triplets and ghost notes and all these things. And like, the casual listener can't really do that. But so I think medication for modern world is definitely, I think, a fair mix of both. There's a lot of parts. There's a lot of parts, especially in the drums. Uh, I think it's definitely um, a great listen for a musician and equally a casual listener, just because there's just so much going on. There's not really room to not hear something new if you really listen close. So I think
Well,
that's cool.
there you have it, folks. Orphan Prodigy, Ian. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on. I'm very grateful to Danny, who we were mentioning all over this interview.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
didn't, I
she's
didn't, I didn't, I didn't bother to mention. So I want to give a shout out to Danny Felt. It sounds like you've been working with her for a long time. I happened to meet her at an event where I think it was like her birthday celebration, and she invited a bunch of the musician people that she knows in LA, and just by chance met her there. And it's been pretty rock and roll ever since. So big shout out to Danny. And again, thank you,
oh
Ian,
yeah,
for
Danny.
being open to my random conversations and wherever they meandered. Again, grateful for the work that you do and for like being pretty candid about what you were struggling with and then how you overcame it and where you are now. Not everyone can do that. So thank you for leaving it all on the field.
No, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I am like the king of meandering, so don't worry about it. I'm sure that I hope your editing job isn't too hard.
Hey, I honestly, it felt pretty natural talking to you, and
Awesome.
I hope this isn't the last time we chat.
Absolutely. Me too, man. Thank you so much for having me.